and welcome to another episode of Disaster Empire Quick Views. This is the podcast where we talk to thought leaders and innovators in resilience. And I have a special treat for you today. So audience, thank you so much for joining. We have Donna Speckhard here, and she's going to be talking about risk resilience and unicorns. So Donna, welcome. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. Glad to be here. I'm a big fan.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And let's just dive right in. I saw that you recently did a webinar with Illuminar, and you shared something that resonated with me quite a bit. So I'm going to look down just to make sure that I capture your wording correctly. But you were talking about the fact that organizations are looking for the resilience unicorn, someone who is well-rounded in all disciplines of risk and resilience. Can you share with the audience what you mean by that?
Yeah, I kind of wish I had said resilience pirates, but James Green stole that from me before I could think of it. So I came up with unicorn. And the reason why I did is because I feel like, as I progress in my career, we're being asked to be more things to more people and to pivot quite a bit. It used to be continuity of operations, kind of where I started my career in this industry. You did just one thing. You were an expert at building exercises, or you were an expert at business continuity plans or something like that. But as I developed my skill sets, and I can remember early on a supervisor telling me, hey, you really have to focus in on one area, like focus in on information security, disaster recovery, and let that be your thing. And I'm just not like that. I'm very type A, I'm very German, but I'm also chaos is my, home, so to speak. So as I started to get skill sets in like global intelligence, safety and security, compliance, risk management, operational risk, all those fun buzzwords, safety, I think I said safety and security, crisis management, business continuity, and a tiny bit of disaster recovery, I found that I could go into meetings. I had a unique perspective to be able to see where there was overlap, and also where we could kind of cross-collaborate as a larger team across the enterprise. And I realized that my job as I progressed in my career was to be not this mythical unicorn, it sounds kind of cool, but more of a relationship builder and a connector, like an advisor or a coach or something like that. And the importance of just understanding enough of each of these little kind of like, if you can picture an umbrella, and risk and resilience is sort of the overarching part of the umbrella. Then you have all these spokes where all these other disciplines fall underneath. If you know enough to go wide, then you can see the big picture, and you can see that it's an umbrella when you step back instead of, being, very upfront and only seeing like a little spoke or something like that. And that's kind of what I meant by that. So hopefully that makes sense.
No, absolutely. And I think I totally agree with that. It seems many of us, right, wear multiple hats within our companies anyway, whether it's DR, crisis management, business continuity, sometimes safety, sometimes security, right? There's a mix of aspects there. But I think to me, the new element is really risk. And although I think we've always thought about risks and exposure as part of those disciplines, I see that we're really leaning forward. And I think maybe you can speak to this as well, but I think the challenge is expecting that one person to be equally versed in all of those things, I think is a challenge, especially as you ladder up in terms of an organization and the complexities therein. So just some of the things that I was thinking about. And when I saw that quote, that I was really, it definitely is something that's being expected, and just kind of questioning, is that viable, right? Is that something that really is going to make us our most successful if we're being asked to think about all of those disciplines at once?
That's exactly true. And, risk has always been sort of a compliance audity role. I think it's a misconception that that's what it is. I always try to, when I have conversations, I always say risk and resilience. Now, I haven't always done that forever and ever, but just more recently, I try to coach it like that, because I think it's really important to show that it goes hand in hand, right? If you think of the whole like crisis management journey where you get left of boom, and then you have boom, and then you have everything that happens after that, it has a whole life cycle. And so understanding the whole life cycle and how it interchanges and intersects and things like that, I think is so important.
Well, hey, I'm going to ask you a question, Donna, that I ask all of my guests, and that is, what does resilience mean to you? And I ask that because it is such a complex term for us, because each person that I talk to has a certain different flavor.
That's such a tough question. And I love that you asked that. And I've seen Disaster Empire, so I knew it was coming. But I think before I give you sort of my definition of what it means, I think I want to talk a little bit about how, with COVID, I think all businesses sort of learn that nothing is certain. So all of the big plans that we had that were all encompassing, it's not that we wanted to throw them out the window, but they weren't as agile and scalable as we thought they were. A lot of us planners for a long time had been saying that, we have to make these plans smaller. They can't sit in a binder on a desk and collect dust. We have all these checklists and we build all these tabletops and exercises that take us months and months and months to create. Unfortunately, what COVID taught us is that there are multiple threats that happen at once, and some that go much longer term than I think we had initially suspected. And so with COVID, you can see that it not only impacted people going to work and children going to school, but it impacted and still impacts supply chain. We still have a lot of supply chain issues that have impacted industries. COVID impacted entire industries, and I don't think anyone could kind of foresee that it changed also the workforce and the skill sets that are out there. We have huge deficits in some areas where people have shifted. They don't want to do that kind of work anymore. And now we have no backfill to fill some of those skilled jobs. And so I feel like, we kind of thought we could work from home. That would be our solution to everything. But I think, like I said, it changed the whole workforce dynamic. We didn't think and figure in also the mental health aspect. And there are a lot of things we didn't think through. We had these initial discussions about them, and then we just never kind of got the ball down the court. I have a great quote from a book called Who Moved My Cheese? I think if you were ever a consultant, you definitely know that book. But it says, and I got to look away for a second, life is no straight and easy corridor along which we travel free and unhampered, but a maze of passages through which we must seek our way, lost and confused, now and again, checked in a blind alley. And that's why I said, chaos is my home kind of thing. Yeah. So we have an understanding that we cannot plan for every single scenario and that some threats are just too big. Climate change, for example, because threats do not have a singular impact. When you ask me, what does resilience mean? I kind of think of it as relationships and interactions of attributes and activities, a culmination of disciplines, like all those disciplines I mentioned earlier that fall under risk and resilience. So those contributions and cross-collaboration efforts are very, very important. Sort of a summary of what a unicorn is, right?
And following up on that, just talking about that unicorn piece, I think some professionals, some of our peers out there might be feeling like they've been hit with a double whammy because, even you were just using the phrase risk and resilience together. Yeah. And I think there's some question of are we ERM now? Are we enterprise risk management? Are we meant to be risk managers? And add that to being the crisis manager and the disaster recovery manager and the business continuity manager, or safety or security. So, all of those pieces. What's your take?
Well, it's interesting that you say that too. One of the things I'm doing research on right now is on artificial intelligence. And in talking with Andrew Owlett, another professional in our small circle. So in talking with Andrew, one of the things that he and I discussed was that artificial intelligence is going to force us in our jobs to sort of rethink our day-to-day. We're going to have to make a pivot at some point to not necessarily be all things to all people, but understand how to grow our positions and how to staff and resource them. Artificial intelligence is going to allow us to free up some of our time with some of these more mundane administrative tasks. What comes to mind immediately is I'm thinking BIA. Finally, I don't have to do one. But,
yay.
Yay. Or third-party risk assessments would be another way that a tool like artificial intelligence could help. I don't know how far off we are from that, And so it seems like we're growing pretty rapidly in this new technology that's with artificial intelligence, with tools and impacts to organizations. But it is going to change people's jobs. They aren't necessarily going to lose their jobs, but it is going to change what their job looks like today. And I think that's the same thing for resilience professionals, right? I'm not saying we all have to have risk manager hats or know disaster recovery inside and out, because I'm not a tech person, but I understand enough to make the connection with where does disaster recovery fit in when we're having discussions about threats and intelligence, or when we're talking about business continuity plans and recovery time objectives and things like that. Just enough to be dangerous, right? Is what I like to say. But I think that that's kind of where we're going. We're going to have to always be learning. I think Glenn Ross, a great movie, always be closing. For us, It's going to be, always be learning, because I think that's really what our job is. And it goes back to what I was saying about our role has kind of morphed into more of an advisory / coaching, maybe even consulting role.
I agree with that. I don't think that's a bad mindset. And along with that, I could see the value of AI. And I know this isn't an AI discussion. We'll have to have you back to talk more about that after you do your research. But, I think it could take off some of more technical roles that we've had or our tasks and really allow us to be more strategic in our thinking, which is what I believe our organizations are really asking of us. We can actually come in with that data versus spending our time collecting that data. And I think that would be a great step forward for all of us in the profession, no matter what discipline, or lens we're looking through. Hey, along with that, as we're thinking about our fellow professionals out there, one of the things I'd love to hear from you are your thoughts on how would you suggest that we be pivoting? You've talked a little bit about it in some of your comments, but could we really focus in on how could we pivot from just thinking about business resilience or business continuity and thinking about resilience and having that mindset? Because that's really what's being asked of us.
I would say over time, right? It doesn't happen overnight. And it's, again, going back to what I said, those soft skills about building relationship. I think our position is probably the most unique position in any company. I feel like we know the most about the business as a whole than anybody else in the company, because everybody else in the company gets snapshots of their sort of area of expertise, right? Because we know about the processes and the interdependencies and the critical suppliers or third parties and pieces that tie into what we identify as critical processes or whatever mission essential functions or whatever name you want to give it, right? We have a unique understanding of how an organization operates and how to prioritize what's most important to that organization. And so when I have conversations with leaders and my stakeholders, one of the things I like to do is tie back everything I talk about to a dollar amount. If you can tie back an impact to money, that seems to resonate with the C-suite. It's not always easy to do because I'm terrible at math and I'm terrible at numbers, but you kind of do what you got to do to get from point A to point B. But I think, in the executives' minds, their, concern usually ties down to money. If you develop a story to tell them, you want to always make sure you're tying it back to that return on investment, because even things like reputational impacts can be tied to a dollar amount.
And I think, just to hop onto that a little bit, because I think sometimes it's been challenging in a traditional BIA, to use your example from earlier, some of our discipline for marketing, that's not something that you would say has a financial impact on the company if it's interrupted in the classic sense, because they're not bringing in dollars, right? They're not revenue generating in strict throughput, functional sense. But then I might thinking about the advertising dollars lost, right? If we're not able to access social media tools, like we had the Facebook outage here. So there is some loss in terms of time and advertising dollar and spend. We may get that back, but we may not, because in today's 24-hour news cycle, digital cycle, social media cycle, that's lost eyeballs, right, on an ad that we had playing it on multiple, social media platforms. If even one goes down, I think that could be catastrophic in today's market. So just trying to give a concrete example. And if you have another one, jump in. But that was where my mind was going to, and thinking maybe of a less traditional example.
Yeah, exactly. I think, when I try to use examples, I try to use what resonates with the audience. So it depends on which senior leader you're talking to. Their priorities are going to be different. That your CEO has different priorities than your CFO and et cetera, right? So you try to talk to them, like your safety and security VP might have, his focus is on people and resources, right? So you kind of have to look at who you're talking to and see if you can craft your discussion in that way. But yeah.
Great example as well. Another thing I'd love to hear your thoughts on is kind of flipping that audience a little bit to those leaders. And we're just talking about, how we should, as professionals, going in and provide examples that really resonate with the leader, depending on where they sit within a company. But what do you think you would say to leaders right now? Because it seems like some of them are very quickly, which is exciting, kind of flipping that switch and saying, hey, we need to be operational resilience or organizational resilience or risk and resilience. Go. And so it seems sometimes impatient and like, hey, why aren't we there? What might you say to them in terms of either their coaching of their employees or in terms of really understanding the depth and breadth of work that needs to be done to make that pivot?
There is a great book called Game Storming. It's a subtitle that's long underneath it, and I forget what it is off the top of my head, but I can send you the link to it. That has a lot of tips and tricks for gamification ideas. And one of the things that's fun is to lead your stakeholders and your leadership through an exercise. They don't actually realize what it is you're doing, but you lead them through like a prioritization exercise where you give them a large problem and then you drill down, you drill down, you drill down, you drill down, and then you take a step back and you can look and see like the big picture. They have numerous exercises that you can do that kind of help in very bite-sized pieces show senior leadership like, okay, you said you wanted these 50 things, you came up with 50 things, but now I've had you prioritize them into buckets. And look, there's only 3 things in this one bucket. And this, you said this was the most important to you. So this is where our resources and focus need to go. And so there's a lot of these examples of where you can employ tools and techniques like gamification. A company like called Illuminar came up with this great little thing that gamification is the muscle memory for agility, which I thought was kind of a cool way to talk about sneaking in a learning opportunity to your leadership, right? But meaningful, right? That would be the approach that I use when I can. Obviously, it doesn't work for every situation. But there are other things like BDO uses crisis cards, which is a very cool kind of gamification technique. You don't need but maybe 15 minutes of time to work through one crisis card. And you have like a situation that's like a 1-sentence situation. And then on the back, you have 3 questions and you split, your little group into like a smaller little groups. And you talk about like answers to those 3 questions. And then what comes out of that is really beneficial. So this book kind of gives you some guidance on how to structure it and things like that. But obviously there are consulting companies out there. There are tools out there that also provide the opportunity to do stuff like that.
That's a great tip, and we'll definitely make sure to link that. And if you haven't read Who Moved My Cheese, we'll put that in the comment show notes below.
That's an old book, but it's a goodie, isn't it? It is an oldie,
but a goodie, definitely. And it definitely rings true, I think, in today's environment, as well as many companies are under expense pressures and lots of reorganization changes. It seems to have become the norm. So I think that's something else, for us as professionals is to be agile, to use the term that you just shared. I think we really need to be able to pivot and be willing to do that quickly. Otherwise, I think we're going to get left behind, in terms of where the marketplace is going and the business itself. All of our organizations are really trying to recover from COVID, I think, honestly, and are having to look at all of those aspects. So I think we need to go along with that flow, so to speak, to be the most successful. Well, hey, wanted to ask your opinion on another area, and that's global intelligence, because I think that definitely has value in terms of understanding risk and being resilient. What are your thoughts on global intelligence and what advice would you give to the audience in terms of either resources or, techniques in this area that you're finding helpful?
Yeah, I think we've all had our hands on some type of global intelligence at one point or another. When I say that term, a lot of times people think, oh, it's like 10 analysts in a room, with FBI backgrounds and stuff like that. And it's not. I mean, global intelligence is just basically gathering information, whether it's through open source or paid subscription service or boots on the ground contact that is able to give you or feed you information that you can put into a common operating picture. And yes, I have a government background, so you hear a lot of these terms, common operating picture, but it's basically, I don't know if all companies do this, but I know quite a few companies have like some type of tool where they map their assets. They have their assets on a map, whether the assets are facilities, factories, people, executives. These common operating pictures can be very basic, from bringing up Google Map, Google Earth, putting in some free layers from NOAA on top of that. And then you can actually go in and plot your assets in Google Earth if you don't have, these fancy tools, as long as you have latitude and longitude or an address. And then you can put like a storm coming in, and you can track the path of the wind and flood zones and things like that. Or you can use, even with like employee background checks or prospective candidate, most companies do some level of human resource background investigation, right? That's some open source information, because you're probably getting that from a resume, and you're getting it from whatever background check services you use to do that, whether it's calling and validating credentials or something like that. The nice thing about global intelligence, and I worked for a hospitality company that had, that I was fortunate to be part of growing their global intelligence program. They had a follow the sun model, which was very cool. And they also had a mobile GSOC. So we would do our common operating picture, our mapping, our ability to see things as they unfold using social media, using a tool on our phone or on our iPad. So it didn't matter where we were. I could wake up at 3 a.m. and I could pull up on my iPad, and there was my GSOC right there. Yep. And it pulled in a lot of different source information. Some of it's free through state and local government. Others are paid subscriptions. So you're talking like Data Miner. Gosh, there's so many services out there. Right. Weather Ops, which is a great service. You can even actually call a meteorologist when you have a question. To, Spokio and other people, and, where you can really like drill down into information on individuals even. And you would be like, well, why do you want information about individuals? It could be a variety of reasons. A hospitality company I worked for was very concerned with their information getting released on the dark web. Obviously, none of us at that company had a background in dark web mining, nor did we want to use company equipment to do that, because we're opening ourselves up to huge cyber risk. Mm-hmm. But there are companies that do that for you. And what we found was a lot of membership loyalty points accounts were being sold on the dark web, and that equals money. So that's free hotel nights, free whatever. Plus with, huge reputational things you can find out at a very simple level. Global intelligence can be as simple as just searching social media, using tags to see what people are saying about your company from a reputational standpoint, to just tracking a hurricane coming inland, to as complex as following terrorist activities, political uprisings, and things like that across the globe. It's such a great tool to have for any organization, especially an international company. At the same time, it's a lot of data. So you really have to know how to mine it, or have people that you use in-house or outsource that can mine and cull all that information for you if you go to that level.
But I agree, there's so many great resources out there. Well, hey, I could talk to you all night. But hey, wanted to ask, is there anything that you wanted to share with this audience that we didn't get a chance to talk about today before we close out?
I'm actually reading a really good book right now that is called Reinventing Resilience: How Organizations Move Beyond Setbacks to Grow Through Challenges. And it's written by great. Paul Fellner. Huh. I'm only at the end of chapter 1. Like, don't ask me too many questions about it. but I saw a podcast with him on it, and he was,
Excellent.
he referred to his book, and I immediately went to Amazon, and it's the first thing I bought. I was like, I got to get it.
Excellent. It sounds like an interesting book. We'll definitely link it if others want to check it out. Well, hey, thank you so much for being on. Really appreciated having you as a guest. I felt like we could have gone for an hour or two and continue to talk. So definitely want to have you back on when you're ready to talk about what you've learned about AI and your thoughts on how we might be able to leverage it. But I'm thinking a lot of the same, taking away some of those mundane tasks, right? And being able to move into more of that strategic, high level, tactical, in a good way, tactical direction, providing guidance and consultancy, as you were saying, to our stakeholders. So much for being here. Really appreciated talking with you.
Thank you so much for having me.